What is something school taught you which turned out to be false? Story 1. Just because you're popular doesn't mean you'll be successful. Since graduating college, it's been all about networks and who likes you. I've literally asked people how they got their job, and they said they knew someone that pulled them in with no qualifications or experience. It's a tough pill to swallow. You want to have a calculator in your pocket. Story 2. College professors would be more strict at it. Thank you, fellow Redditors, for my highest upvoted comment. Ironically, I might fail one of my classes because of a professor, but at least I have upvotes. Story 3. The body cannot produce new nerve brain cells. Turns out neurogenesis is a very real phenomenon. By the way, I was taught that the body cannot make new nervous cells this year in my senior human anatomy class, long after neurogenesis was discovered. Story 4. Nutrition. When I started elementary school, it was the 4 food groups. By high school, it was the food pyramid. And by college, it turned into my plate. You can't ever keep up, and it constantly changed, so who knows what'll turn it in next. Story 5. That grades in elementary and middle school actually matter. I had a 45 in my 5th grade history class at one point, and I loved history. I just didn't like having to memorize the preamble to the Constitution and other pointless things my school made us do. I now read and study history on my own, and know far more history than the average person. Story 6. Speaking about suicide drives people to commit suicide. Our school put a policy in place that disallowed any discussion surrounding suicide and mental health. Over the course of 3 years, we lost 3 students and 2 teachers to suicide. I'm now studying psychology and work in community services. Speaking about suicide saves lives. Story 7. 2 things. 1. Keep these papers, they're important, don't lose them. I ended up hoarding papers all the way from 1st grade to senior year of high school too. If you ever get a C or into a fight or cheat, you'll never go to college, and you'll be blacklisted from applying or attending any of them. I didn't really think of the impact these things had on me, and suffice to say, I feel like I'm worse off for it. Story 8. There's a common misconception that dry ice and elemental iodine do not have a melting point. Elemental iodine will melt at 114 C, but there will be so much purple gas due to high vapor pressure that it's difficult to see. Meanwhile, dry ice won't melt at atmospheric pressure, but if you increase the pressure to 5 atm, it should melt into a liquid. Obviously, you can't do that unless you have special equipment. Story 9. That the working adult world is a brutal autocracy, run entirely by slave-driving bosses who are absurdly strict about getting everything done exactly to their specifications. In reality, school was 7 shitty part-time jobs you take home with you and do again at night, but with no guidance. Don't forget that you're a financial and emotional burden on your family by attending rather than bringing in money. The reality of work is that most people just want to get things done comfortably and go home on time. Story 10. One teacher kept bitching to the class about how boys are horrific perverts and deserve to be burned in. She got fired after we got a slip around asking for her resignation, sent it to the principal, and didn't show up to her class for 3 days. One guy had recorded her saying all that, and there was no dispute after that. Story 11. That writing involves a bunch of uniform, cut-and-dry steps for brainstorming with dozens of mind map worksheets, drafting, revising, editing, etc., and that this is the way real writers did it. Am now a published writer. Yeah, no, not how it works in the slightest. Story 12. The provinces and territories of Canada in the United States. We had to memorize them in middle school in the mid to 0s. But our teacher didn't update any political border changes that happened after the fall of the Soviet Union. So I didn't know Nunavut exists until I happened to look at a map of Canada as an adult. Story 13. That my grade in school will decide my future. And according to that, I will be a useless person in future. You all teachers, that you are going to be offered drugs all the time. I have yet to be offered drugs without me asking for free. Story 14. That American Indians were savages who just gave us land, then sporadically fought over it. Textbooks these days won't even include most of the fighting or violence. Thank heavens my mom talked to me about what I was learning and set the record straight. I learned more about true American history from my own mother at home than the school system. To this day, these widely known facts are being ignored in schools and most other places. Story 15. I was taught in 3rd grade that the Brontosaurus was so massively big that it had a second brain positioned in its rear hips that only controlled its tail. I believed this to be a fact until I was talking with my fiancée and told her about the 2-brain Brontosaurus. She said that wasn't a thing. So we Googled it, and it is just another thing she was right about. Story 16. I went to Christian school. I don't know where to start. There was my English teacher who spent entire classes telling us that dinosaurs were still alive and live in the jungles of South America. My Bible teacher told us about the time an angel came to her window after having premarital to say God was disappointed in her, but that she could change her ways. My social studies teacher was convinced that rock music was a form of satanic mind control. My Spanish teacher was really great, no complaints. Story 17, the reason and mechanism for tides, is usually about 50 wrong. The way most jet engines produce thrust is typically explained in wrong or incomplete terms. The South didn't rebel from the North American Civil War because of states' rights as some sort of ethereal high-minded philosophy. It was the right to keep and own human beings as slave labor. On that note, as good as you think Robert E. Lee was, he lost the war, so any praise must be tempered with that realization. Some Native Americans actually did have written language. The falsehoods and incomplete context apropos Native American culture in American schools is bothersome. Atoms look nothing like the model taught in many chemistry classes. Blood is never blue when it is in the body. Carrots aren't really good for your eyes. And, most importantly, most kids aren't special. By definition, most would be average. Instead of teaching that stupidity, we should teach regression to mean and how to move the mean such that the regression to it is to a place higher than when you started. Then, even though you are merely average, the average is quite good. Story 18, you're not allowed to use the bathroom during lessons because when you go to work, you won't be able to use it whenever you feel like in secondary school. There are no numbers below 0 in infant school. Your right hand is the hand you write with in nursery. I'm left-handed. If you fail your SATs, it will affect your whole life. In the UK, SATs are exams taken at the end of primary school. At age 11, they're used for ranking schools, and secondary schools use them to decide what classes you'll be in for the first term. But after that, nobody cares what you got on your SATs, and it makes no difference to your life. So this was completely false, the taste buds thing. Story 19, almost everything except for biology, chemistry, and mathematics, everything else, including history, was either an outright lie or a half-truth. One thing they should teach kids again is stop, drop, and roll. That entire piece was taken out to make room for the DARE program. You know, drugs are really exciting. Story 20, schools teachers are smart, and no. Reality, most public schools teachers in the U.S. are the least intellectually curious people I know, and actually don't know jack without a lesson plan in front of them. Story 21, mountains grow whenever you speak. This was my second grade teacher, and I am now in 10th grade. She was a total to us guys, not the girls, and went so far once that someone in the class ahead of ours was pulled probably around 10 feet by the hair on the floor. He was a fat kid and came to school the next day with his hair shaved off. She has since retired, and we all laugh about her now. But her telling us that the mountains grow for every word we speak was the most bullshit thing I have ever heard. I believe her for a while, but about a year or two later my brother told me she was speaking nonsense. I still feel very stupid for believing her in the first place, but I was like 6 or 7 and didn't know any better. Story 22, electron shells. The first shell contains 2 electrons. If I'm right, those are technically probability levels, not hard and fast shells. Of course, I couldn't figure that out when I was in school, so there's every chance that I have it wrong now. Story 23, wow, said the Indians, how kind of our new friends, the American government, to give us a place to live all for ourselves. We're so excited to move to the Oklahoma Territory. What a fun adventure this will be. Story 24, that all women's cycles last 28 to 30 days. American education. Y'all, I myself don't even fit into that category, so it super stressed me out when I started going irregular, and even skipping. They never taught us that skipping could be a normal thing. Needless to say, IFREAKED, the first time I skipped despite being a virgin. Story 25, that weed is a gateway drug. That nonsense. Guess what happens when you have tremendous ADHD and suddenly getting stoned makes you want nothing else than to discover why such and such is this way, or how such and such operates. And so goes the GPA in school to a higher number. Every single person who told me weed would make them look down on me, that it would speak of worse problems, or that it would speak badly of my habits. Turns out when you have some talent skill, but can't spend the mental capacity to sit down for 2 seconds to hone that talent skill until you get stoned, we can actually help. That normal physical health routines include a 1-mile run in 7 minutes, the pacer test, and as many push-ups and sit-ups as you can do in 2 minutes, which was expected to be about 50 each. This was when I was 12. I also discovered last week, 10 years later, that every school building in my district hadn't updated their air vents since they were first installed in the 50s, and were pumping pure CO2 into the classrooms, so all that physical activity in a no-oxygen zone was healthy and normal for my age. Story 26, in the 70s, we were taught to run and open the windows during tornado drills. This was supposedly to equalize the pressure in the building. Not only is this a ridiculous myth, but near the windows is the last place you want to be in a tornado. Story 27, oh here we go. World War II ended in 1943. No one had a dash in the middle. The word for door in French was door. Being was okay because all the people in 1 year were boys, and they didn't take us on a yearly last year school trip because we were all boys. You hold a pen like you hold a knife. They didn't even mention the theory of evolution Roman Catholic school. Holi was a Jewish festival. Story 28 note, this took place in 96-97, that as a white person, you should always be apologetic toward blacks because it's not their fault they are more likely to commit crimes. If they commit crimes, it's your fault, you should apologize. Then we had every kid walk around the room and apologize to the 3 black kids in class for enslaving their grandfathers. No, I'm not kidding, this was 3rd grade, I think. And right after we watched a video on how about MLK ended all racism in the U.S. I don't remember the video, but basically it was a cartoon where a boy from our age goes back in time and takes a young MLK to the future. But since he took MLK out of the timeline, everyone is a super racist KKK neo-Nazi. The video ends with MLK walking through the time portal back to his time and growing up in the process, where he is then shot. After apologizing to the black youth for something that happened a century ago, please write an essay to their parents and grandparents about how sorry you are for inventing slavery. Our teacher then told us to pray because of how terrible we were. In case anyone was wondering, she was a WASP and a Karen put together. This seems so far-fetched, so out there, and like a comedy. The lesson was being overly apologetic for something that happened literally centuries ago will cure it, and that's all it needs to be fixed. You Mrs. Fields, not her name, but close enough. I found the video, Can't Masturbate, in the library. Story 29, my primary school teacher, who was my favorite teacher ever, told us during class that thunder was the sound of clouds colliding with each other. I believed this well into my 20s before I was corrected by somebody. I thought they were having me on, but I went and looked it up, and sure enough, not clouds banging together. I do not know why, but I have never been able to reconcile this. It still burns my that thunder is not the sound of clouds colliding. I have been hung up on it for over 20 years now. Story 30. I mean, this isn't really false, but I haven't used or seen MLA formatting since high school. Learning APA and Chicago Turabian in high school would have been nice. Story 31, smallpox blankets. Never happened, like, at all. Apparently it was all made up by a single professor from Colorado, and then everyone automatically took it as fact. Story 32, I had a 3rd grade teacher try to tell us that green was a primary color, and you couldn't mix any colors to make green. I said that she was wrong, and that the primary colors were red, yellow, and blue, and that you could mix blue and yellow to get green. She tried to argue with me, and I told her that if she gave me some blue and yellow paint, I could show her. She was not happy. I was a quiet, well-behaved kid, but I couldn't let that one pass. Oh, also my grade 11 social studies teacher, history teacher, didn't know that potatoes came from South America, not from Ireland. My mother and I were talking to her about something near Thanksgiving, and the topic of being thankful came up, to which we said we were thankful for all of the wonderful foods that came from the Americas that the Native American people painstakingly developed, like corn, tomatoes, chocolate, and potatoes. But what did the Irish eat? She asked, shocked, gruel. I mean, I knew she wasn't a great teacher, but I pretty much lost any and all remaining respect for her at that point. Story 33, Louis XVI was an out-of-touch fat cat. It turns out that early in his reign, Louis was very pro-Enlightenment and was trying to make things better for the French populace. The French nobility and clergy were they real ones holding back French progression as they fought Louis at every turn. Story 34, it would have to wear X number of condoms to actually prevent getting AIDS from with someone who has AIDS. Man, those Republicans just love teen pregnancy and spreading VD. I assume that's why the Bush administration required this bullshit to be taught to me in HS. Story 35, my high school world history teacher told us that guys have a point of no return during, and that girls need to watch what they wear, because guys can't always control themselves. How this was relevant to world history, I will never know. By that point, no one in our class listened to him. But this was apparently a yearly tirade, because my younger sister was in his class 2 years later with a girl that had been assaulted. She turned him into the principal after he gave the class the exact same speech. He was put on a paid suspension. He also had some interesting theories on the JFK assassination, and apparently personally knew the doctor that treated him after he was shot. My school was located in the Dallas area. So while not impossible, I highly doubt it. Because this guy was a loon, I was taught almost no world history that year. Story 36, that the trades were for people who couldn't get into college, and that working with your hands was bad. Every tradesperson I know makes serious bank, a strong union, and is in better shape because they don't sit on there all day like I do. Story 37, that gender and we're the same and exist in a binary. Folks, life ain't black and white, only infinite shades of gray, and such a fundamental oversimplification really doesn't do anyone any good. Story 38, the Texas public school system taught me that the U.S. Civil War was about states' rights and not slavery. There were multiple choice questions on tests asking what started the Civil War, with a slavery and B states' rights as answers, and teachers would argue with anyone who answered slavery. I graduated high school in 2013. It was about slavery. Story 39, that adults are always right, that you had to go to a teacher when someone bullies you, that anything they teach you in secondary serve for something in ordinary live, and that 112, large story. If you want to know why 11 isn't 2, write a comment saying so. Story 40 about Christopher Columbus. He never made it to America. When the Indians refused to give Columbus some goods, Columbus slaughtered all Indians in his way. Story 41, that electricity go from positive to negative. In fact, it is the opposite. When they discovered the error, they didn't switch the standard to avoid a chaos. So they're technically right as the standard want, but physically wrong. Story 42, stand up for yourself. In the real world, it's like that. But if you stand up for yourself or someone else in school, no, everyone involved gets the same suspension. Even if you just sat there and got beat up, you still get suspended. Hypocrites. Can't wait until I graduate EI before E, except after C. Story 43, it's important to know that whatever we have learned about the American Revolution is heavy propaganda. Much of our textbooks is based off of a historian who lived during the Andrew Jackson presidency. Here's some key notes that are a bit different. The colonist was not interested in representation. They already paid taxes, but not directly. Since they lacked representation in Parliament, it means they actually couldn't be directly taxed by the British government. Because that was unconstitutional, the colonists were just fine with it. They paid their taxes through custom duties and external taxation. The Stamp Act was a one-time deal that Parliament never tried again. It was found to be unconstitutional, but their declaratory act advising they had a right to tax the colonies was just them saving face. It had no real power. The Boston Tea Party wasn't so much of a party as it was a bunch of semi-employed and out-of-work sailors who got drunk and, in the dead of night, quietly and without bravado, threw tea in the harbor. They did not throw the tea in the harbor because tyranny or some. They did it because John Hancock was a smuggler and he smuggled an illegal Dutch tea to avoid the custom duties. Since British tea had no more custom duties than Hancock had major competition and his smuggling operations were threatened. Which leads us to the Sons of Liberty were not a bunch of freedom-loving rebels. They were alcoholic sailor thugs who got free rum from John Hancock in exchange for them to harass, threaten, bully, punish, beat up, and generally cause mayhem against anything that might threaten Hancock's smuggling operation. The British were trying to crack down on smuggling, and in response Hancock employed a bunch of drunk thugs to cause mayhem. I should point this out again, but it bears repeating, the colonists had no desire to have representation in Parliament. This would mean they would have to pay more taxes and not less. In fact, the colonists enjoyed very low taxation that they paid for years without much complaint at all. It really wasn't until after the Stamp Act that they decided that they really didn't want to be taxed at all, period. Finally, the increase in taxes were through constitutional import and custom duties taxation that the colonists were already used to. It wasn't to pay off the French and Indian War, but to employ a long-standing army to defend the colonists from Indian raids out near the frontier. The colonial governments refused to protect the frontiers people who went out near Indian territory. So the king decided he was going to help his subjects. He protected them like any good king will do. Final propaganda notes. The militia made up the bulk of the revolution at the start. However, they were undisciplined, likely to run away, and if they did finish a battle, they all usually melted away to never pick up a rifle again. Their idealism quickly went away the moment they started seeing their friends die around them. People should know what really started the revolution, and half the reason why the colonists rebelled was the Somerset case. A slave brought to England was ruled on by the British equivalent of a Supreme Court, and they found slavery to be a horrific institution that has no intrinsic value. This put a jolt into the revolution because they didn't want to lose their slaves or pay them. The Patriots were in the minority. There were far more loyalists than there were patriots. The Patriots actually overthrew the colonial governments, suspended courts, declared martial law, and stole property. During the times of the Revolution, the Patriots committed more tyrannical acts than what they accused the king of doing. Lastly, slavery is not mentioned much, but a lot of slaves gained true freedom. During the American Revolution, 100,000 men, women, and children escaped the cruelty of their masters and found freedom during this revolution. Fortunately, none of what these radical people ever came to pass. The American Revolution was started because of greed, paranoia, and fear of losing slavery as an institution. Nothing happened the way we were taught in our schools. Story 44, the usual college will be 10x harder than HS. Bull heck, I did better in college than I did in HS. The professors treated me like an adult and trusted me to do the work, and I did the work, studied, and passed the classes. So to the teacher who told me I would need to work harder, or ID flunk college, kindly kiss my. Story 45, you don't have dyslexia. At some point very early on, I was taken aside because my handwriting and presentation were, and told to read words off of a sheet. I was literate, so I did that pretty well by my standards and was told that I was definitely not dyslexic. Fun fact, that's not how you test for dyslexia. Story 46, that the Indians and the Pilgrims had a big happy Thanksgiving dinner with each other, were happy friends forever, and that Columbus was a great man. In reality, the natives began to die of smallpox and other diseases in staggering numbers after the Pilgrims visited, which caused them to rightfully be suspicious of the whites people. So they went to war and killed each other. Columbus was a tyrant and a conqueror who enslaved and killed and tortured the natives. It's so how in kindergarten they brainwash you with this, and then in 4th grade they cram the trail of tears down your throat. Like, okay, are we good friends with the natives? Which one is it? Story 47, Australia is not geographically an island. So if someone asks you what the biggest island is, it's Greenland, not Australia. Islands are a mass of land that is surrounded by water and smaller than a continent. So therefore Australia, being a continent, cannot be an island. Story 48, how to make a resume. When we were in class, we were told make it look like every other resume out there. When I was having troubles getting a job out of high school, I took a free course in the employment assistance building. They help people find work, and one of the things the instructor told us was make it stand out. Put some of yourself into the design. She said to do this so it would catch the eye of the employer more, and you'd more likely get a call. While telling a bit about yourself, like animals, put a faded stencil of one in the background light enough for you to still see the word of your resume, but dark enough that it stands out against the paper. Add colors. It actually helped me get a job. The first round of resumes I dropped off after that course. At one of the local businesses I dropped a resume off. It was my last one for the day, since I needed to print more and look for more hiring ads. Called me on my way home to set up an interview for the next day. It couldn't have been more than 5 minutes after I dropped the resume off. Story 49, Columbus was a hero. While for the perspective of most Americans, he is in fact, he discovered the Americas. He did bring Europeans over here, but he brought something else, smallpox. Along with other diseases, smallpox was brought to the Americas by Europeans. He was untimely responsible for the death of many innocent Native Americans. Even though not directly, he founded the European-American connection. Story 50, that Marie Antoinette said, let them eat cake. Firstly, the correct translation would more likely be let them eat brioche, and secondly, it was first circulated in a series of books, which was written before she was 9. It appears to have been propaganda circulated in the years of the French Revolution to unite the people against the royals. Good article on Wikipedia, but I can't link it properly. Sorry. Story 51, nearly everything. My history books were edited, censored, and not fact-checked. Today, I firmly believe the writer got bored and started making up. Life skills and self-discovery were non-existent. The science was arbitrary and subjective. My whole life is a lie. Drink water, even when you're not thirsty, and drink 8 ounces of water a day. Our body doesn't need that much, and when it needs water, it tells us. Those lies were made by Gatorade to sell more product, and now it's taught in PE all the time. Story 52, Christopher Columbus discovered America. He did it while trying to prove the world was round. He made nice with the Indians and brought a couple back to meet the king. Columbus never made it to North America. He landed in the West Indies. He tried to take all of the natives' riches, mainly gold. When they didn't have any, he murdered them to make a point. Also, the world had been proven round hundreds of years before he posed this idea to the Italian government, who rejected it before Spain. Story 53, you'll use this every day in your career. Every professor in my engineering program, I know from my first degree and 10 years of career experience that I want. Story 54, you need a college degree to be successful. We live in a time unlike any other in our short history, where information is literally accessible to anyone with a will to learn. College offers structure and goals, not success. Success comes from within. Story 55, the whole of science. When you get into higher education, they even tell you that most of the stuff you learned in science is either false, not accurate, or there's way more to it. Story 56, I was taught I was stupid. My English teacher told me that all the children in her classes, I was the one who would achieve nothing. As an adult, I gained a BA first class, DipT secondary school teaching in media and English. Story 57, Columbus, discover America. No, the people who there first discovered it. Leif Erikson discovered it. Columbus thought the earth was shaped like a pear, landed in the Caribbean and killed millions, and at the end of his life still thought he made it to India. Story 58. During ed, I was told that if I had outside of marriage, I would get AIDS and I would die. Turns out, you can have outside of marriage, and HIV has pretty effective treatments. Story 59. If you don't go to a hyper-expensive private university, you will never make any money and die poor. Didn't help the anxiety and depression when I only managed to apply for one university, and it turned out to be one of the most unhealthy choices of my entire life. 40K debt, not counting the tens of thousands my parents paid and thousands of interest and no degree. Yay, depression. Well, I managed to not kill myself so far. Story 60. Well, I don't have a personal answer, but half my Facebook friend list wants algebra removed from the curriculum. Please don't remove algebra. It's useful. Okay, T checks. Story 61-1. Calculators will never be allowed on test 2. Cursive will be required for everything 3. That I would need higher level maths in everyday life for. The internet is not a reliable source of information.